Hi, episode 10 of year 3, Journey to Double Bodyweight Back Squat. So this one is all about velocity loss threshold training applied to the 3x10 program. So I think lots of people might be familiar with the 3x10 and traditionally just kind of basically pick a weight that's hard, 10 RM roughly, and do that for 3 sets, and obviously it's far too simple for me to do it that way, so I've tried to find a more complicated way of doing it. Going back in time, find what I think is the original version of it, which is one set at 50% of your 10 RM, one set at 75% of your 10 RM, and one set at 100% of your 10 RM. So that's how I kind of fabricated this particular program with a weekly undulating, or attempting to apply a weekly undulating periodization model to that. And I say attempting to apply because as always, you have a plan and then life happens, and that life interferes with the plan, and it doesn't always kind of work out as you'd like it to do so. So the idea was to do a heavy week where I did all that every exercise was 3 sets of 10, and then that was 3 times per week, and then the following week it would still be 3 weight sessions per week, but just do the first 2 sets, so a third of the volume off, and also the most intense demanding session of that. The idea being that I'd have a kind of every other week was a recovery week, and that would allow me to maintain some progress, and in the process of maintaining that progress, not feel quite as battered and bruised and tired as I did before. Although I've got to say I wasn't feeling particularly battered and bruised by the last one, maybe more mentally than physically. So how has it been going? So last week I tried to explain how I'd manipulated some kind of data and graph to track ongoing progress. So let's see how that's been going. So this is up to date so far. So where there's been gaps, that could be because it's a deloading week, or it could be there's missed session. So deloading weeks aren't always, so missed sessions aren't always part of a deload, and that this week's been the case of that. Basically a couple of days where life circumstances have basically overridden what my capacity to train were, so I've had to miss a session just because time just didn't allow for that to happen. So I'll go with the top grey bar to begin with. This is going to be the more consistent bar, or line if you like, because this represents 90 kilos or 75% of 1 RM, 10 RM. So every session I do a squat session, this should be done. So this should track more consistently, more on a more daily basis, where my progression is. And that would basically say this kind of, it's relatively stable. I won't say I've had any meaningful change in that yet. The error bars, as again on the last version of this, represents the fastest and slowest rep. So I think I did a session yesterday, which was, because I was doing 2 days back to back, this is again where you find ways to fit the session in. I knew I was doing a session today. I didn't have a lot of time yesterday, so I had to fit like a deload version of a session in. So that produced the fastest rep at 90 kilos I've done since I've been doing this particular program. You can see it's jumped above that 0.75 threshold mark there, and the slowest rep was kind of on par with some other previous sessions. So quite a broad range of results. Today that range was much narrower, but the overall velocity was much slower, and I didn't have any of those kind of upper velocities. The more complicated way of kind of interpreting the graph is when I look at the actual 10 RM sets, because of the load of the velocity loss approach, which basically, if anybody's not seen my previous videos or familiar with velocity loss threshold training, is your volume is regulated by how much your movement slows down across the set. So I've set a 20% loss based on the best repetition that I perform. That best repetition could and often is the first repetition, but it doesn't have to be. It could be the second, third or fourth. It doesn't matter. Once you drop below 20% of that best velocity, your set is over with. I have put another rule in place because life isn't complicated enough, where I'll always do 5 repetitions of that. So no matter what kind of velocity loss I get, I'm always going to do 5, and then it's how many more past 5 the velocity allows me to get. So today, this is where it's going to really highlight the variability of kind of strength and strength training. So today I did 6 repetitions. So last week I did 5 repetitions before the velocity loss threshold was done. But last week, if you can see on that, the blue bar is the average velocity for all repetitions performed. The yellow bar is for just the first 5 repetitions. And I use the word that because I'll always do 5. So no matter how many I do past 5, the first 5 will always be kind of a comparable between sets. But both of those markers, the blue line and the yellow line, both slowed down. But this is where it gets really quite challenging because I did more repetitions today. The fastest rep was slower than it was the other day. The overall set was slower than it was the other day. But I managed to get 6 repetitions before I hit the velocity loss threshold. Basically, that means that my repetitions were within a relatively narrow range until I hit repetition 6. Then it kind of dropped off a cliff where the other repetitions were, they still dropped off the same, but from a higher threshold. But they dropped off much quicker, they dropped off a repetition sooner. So it gets really quite messy. Ultimately, what will happen is, hopefully I'll get better over a period of time, and both the reps will increase and the velocity will increase. What may happen is, as the reps increase, this yellow line will start to kind of angle upwards because the first 5 repetitions are faster because I'm capable of not fatiguing anywhere near as much. The blue line might handle around the same line because that will include the slower repetitions that come at rep 6, 7, 8, 9 and above. So that's kind of how it might be. So as the orange columns increase in height, as more repetitions are performed, the yellow line should go up, but the blue line might stay relatively similar. So there's a bigger difference between the overall set and the first 5 repetitions. That's kind of how it should go. But I'm kind of like bouncing around a minute, very, very similar, very stable. And this is where it's really helpful to kind of reflect back on some of the other kind of graphs and data that I've shown going, nobody responds, or I certainly don't respond in a kind of very linear fashion. You do one session, you get better, you do another session, you get better, you do another session, you get better. You sometimes have these threshold moments where you kind of accumulate a body of training, and then all of a sudden you have this kind of sudden adaptation, and you kind of launch up a level. And if you look back at the graph I showed you for 100 at 20 reps at 100 kilos, I had like 2 months effectively of kind of no adaptation, of no change, and then June kicked around and then boom, within 3 weeks later I'd met the threshold and I was moving on. So it's just about being patient now and accumulating the reps and the training hours and getting that consistency, and then eventually the adaptation will occur. So that's kind of how it sits in the minute. So using patience as driven by the data from previous programs. This isn't the same program, so will it happen in the same way? Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. But I can draw confidence that just because I haven't seen adaptation today or over the last couple of weeks, it could happen next week, week after. Who knows? But patience is the key.